Let's start with the creatures that are merely unsettling, and slowly work our way towards the ones living at depths humans have only visited a handful of times in all of history. And here's the part that should bother you. We have better maps of the surface of Mars than we do of our own ocean floor. We've seen more of another planet, millions of miles away, than we've seen of our own backyard, a few miles straight down. So let's go take a look at exactly what we've been missing, starting near the surface, in the part of the ocean that still gets a little sunlight, and working our way down into the part that has never once seen daylight in its entire existence. Number 10. The Vampire Squid. Living at around 900 meters down, in a stretch of ocean scientists genuinely call the oxygen minimum zone because there's barely enough breathable oxygen there to support life at all, the vampire squid is, despite the name, almost entirely harmless. It doesn't drink blood. It doesn't even eat other animals directly, instead collecting drifting debris and waste particles with sticky filaments, essentially functioning as the ocean's least glamorous vacuum cleaner. Its main defense mechanism, when threatened, is to turn itself inside out, exposing rows of spiky-looking projections along its arms while simultaneously cloaking itself in a glowing blue mucus designed to confuse predators long enough to escape. If a human somehow encountered one at that depth, the worst-case outcome would be getting lightly startled by a sudden glow, which is a deeply underwhelming threat assessment for an animal whose name promises so much more. The vampire squid also has the largest eyes relative to its body size of any animal on the planet, proportionally even larger than the giant squids. Despite being only about the size of a football, which feels like an upgrade nobody specifically requested. So, really, the scariest thing about the vampire squid is just its name, which was clearly written by someone who never bothered to read the rest of the file. Number 9. The Giant Isopod. Found at depths between 700 and 2,500 meters, this is essentially a pill bug the size of a house cat, and once you've seen one crawling slowly across the ocean floor in full detail, you cannot unsee it for the rest of your life. They primarily scavenge the remains of dead whales that sink to the ocean floor, an event scientists call a whale fall, and they're capable of going without food for years at a time, between meals, simply waiting motionless in the dark for the next windfall to arrive. The giant isopod isn't dangerous to humans at all, doesn't bite, doesn't sting, and has no real interest in anything that isn't already dead. It's just deeply, profoundly unsettling in the same way finding a normal-sized spider in your house is fine, but finding one the size of a dinner plate completely changes your entire relationship with your home, your bedroom, and possibly your decision to ever sleep again. Some giant isopods kept in aquariums have been documented refusing food for over 5 years straight without any apparent harm, which is either the most extreme metabolism in the animal kingdom or proof that they're simply better at patience than literally every human alive. Number 8. The Frilled Shark. Living around 1,500 meters down, this shark looks less like a fish and more like something that escaped from a much older version of Earth, which, as it turns out, is exactly what it is. The frilled shark has barely changed in 80 million years, has around 300 backward-curving teeth arranged in 25 separate rows, and moves through the water with a snake-like, undulating motion rather than the typical shark glide most people picture. It's considered a living fossil, meaning it survived the extinction event that wiped out the dinosaurs by simply staying exactly where it was, in the dark, and not telling anyone it was still down there. Encounters with live specimens are so rare that most of what we know comes from animals accidentally caught in deep-sea fishing nets, completely disoriented by the unfamiliar shallow pressure on the way up. A live frilled shark was successfully filmed swimming in its natural habitat for the first time only in 2007, meaning for the entirety of recorded human history before that point, this was an animal we mostly knew through dead specimens and secondhand descriptions. Number 7. The Goblin Shark. Found at depths around 1,300 meters, this shark's most distinctive feature is a jaw that doesn't stay in place like every other animal's does. When it detects prey nearby, its entire jaw rapidly extends outward from its face on a kind of internal slingshot mechanism, snatching the prey before retracting back into its normal resting position. The entire motion happens in roughly 1/10 of a second, fast enough that most footage of it looks less like an actual biological process and more like a visual glitch in the recording itself. It's one of the only animals on Earth where evolution essentially looked at a regular jaw and decided that wasn't aggressive enough, so it added a second deployment stage. Researchers have nicknamed this mechanism a slingshot feeding strike, which is a remarkably tame name for something that looks, in slow-motion footage, Like the shark's entire face briefly detaches from its skull before snapping back into place. If you were close enough to actually trigger that reflex, you wouldn't see it coming either. The strike is faster than a human eye can track in real time, meaning the first sign anything had happened would already be the aftermath. Number 6, the anglerfish. Living between 1,000 and 4,000 meters, the anglerfish is famous for the glowing lure dangling from its head, powered by bioluminescent bacteria, used to attract curious prey directly into its waiting mouth in complete darkness. But the genuinely strange part of this creature isn't the lure at all. It's the mating process. Male anglerfish are dramatically smaller than females, sometimes a fraction of their size, and upon finding a mate in the vast emptiness of the deep ocean, the male permanently bites down and fuses to her body, eventually losing his eyes, his internal organs, and any ability to survive independently, becoming nothing more than a permanent tissue attachment that exists solely to provide reproductive material whenever needed. Some female anglerfish have been found with multiple males fused to their bodies simultaneously, like a collection of spare parts she never asked for, which is either the strangest relationship structure anywhere in the animal kingdom, or, from a purely efficiency standpoint, one of the smartest, depending entirely on how you choose to look at it. Out of the more than 200 known species of anglerfish, only a fraction actually use this fusion strategy, but it's the one that gets all the attention, mostly because it sounds like something a horror screenwriter would reject, for being too unbelievable. Number 5, the giant squid. Living at depths around 1,000 meters, the giant squid can grow up to 43 feet long and has eyes roughly the size of a basketball. The largest eyes of any animal on the entire planet evolved specifically to detect even the faintest traces of light and movement in near total darkness. For most of human history, giant squids were considered pure myth, the source of ancient sailor legends about massive sea monsters with enormous tentacles dragging entire ships beneath the waves. It wasn't until 2004 that one was first photographed alive in its natural habitat, and not until 2012 that one was successfully filmed on camera for the first time ever, meaning this animal spent considerably longer being treated as folklore and ghost story material than, as confirmed, documented science. Giant squids are also known to engage in genuine combat with sperm whales, one of the only predators large enough to challenge them, and whales recovered from these encounters are frequently found covered in massive circular sucker scars from a fight nobody on the surface ever actually witnessed, happening entirely in darkness, hundreds of meters below any boat that might have been passing overhead. Number 4, the Fangtooth Fish. Found at depths up to 5,000 meters, the fangtooth has the largest teeth relative to body size of any fish in the entire ocean, so disproportionately large that the fish has evolved special bony sockets on either side of its own brain just to allow its mouth to fully close without accidentally impaling itself with every single bite. It rarely grows larger than 6 inches long from end to end, which somehow makes the whole situation considerably more unsettling rather than less, since the size difference does absolutely nothing to soften the design. If you scaled a fangtooth up to the size of an actual human, the resulting mouth would look less like a face and more like a medieval weapon someone had strapped on for a costume that went a little too far. Despite the appearance, fangtooths are completely harmless to humans, mainly because nobody is realistically diving 5 kilometers down to find out otherwise. They were also long considered 2 entirely separate species, before researchers eventually realized the larger and smaller specimens being caught were simply the same fish at different life stages, which means even marine biologists initially underestimated exactly how strange this animal actually was. Number 3, the Gulper Eel. Living at depths between 3,000 and 6,000 meters, the Gulper Eel is built almost entirely around its mouth, which can unhinge and expand to several times the width of its own body, allowing it to swallow prey significantly larger than itself, completely whole. Its stomach is similarly elastic, stretching far beyond what should reasonably be possible to accommodate whatever it manages to catch. Since meals are rare, unpredictable, and not worth being picky about in an environment this dark and empty. The rest of its body is little more than a thin, whip-like tail trailing behind this enormous mouth, leading some researchers to describe it less as a fish with a mouth, and more as a mouth that happens to have a small, mostly irrelevant fish attached to the back of it. It also has a tiny light-producing organ at the very tip of its tail, theorized to lure prey from behind, which is either an incredibly clever hunting strategy or proof that even this creature got bored of relying on just the one terrifying feature. Despite the nightmare fuel mouth, gulper eels are actually quite weak swimmers, and gentle by deep-sea standards, drifting passively rather than actively chasing anything down. meaning the design exists almost entirely for opportunistic feeding rather than active predatory aggression. A human at that depth would have far bigger problems than the eel itself, namely a crushed and instantly lifeless body well before any eel got close. But if pressure suits ever advance enough to make a close encounter possible, that unhinging jaw is genuinely large enough to attempt swallowing something roughly human-sized, even if its small frame couldn't actually do anything with it afterward. Number 2. The Black Dragonfish. Living around 2,000 meters down, the black dragonfish has skin so dark it absorbs over 99% of the light that hits it, making it functionally invisible even when caught directly in a research camera's spotlight, essentially a small swimming void with fins. It hunts using a small bioluminescent lure dangling beneath its chin, similar in concept to the anglerfish, but its actual advantage lies somewhere else entirely. Uniquely among nearly all deep-sea creatures, the black dragonfish can both produce and see red light, a wavelength that's invisible to almost everything else living down there, essentially giving it a private night vision channel that none of its prey even know exists. It is, quite literally, hunting using a color its victims are biologically incapable of perceiving, which means something could be staring directly at a hunting dragonfish, fully alert, and have absolutely no idea it was even there. The dragonfish itself only grows to around 6 inches long, meaning its biggest advantage over every other predator on this list isn't size or strength at all, just an evolutionary trick that nothing else down there has ever managed to catch up to. Number 1. The Hadal Zone itself. At the very bottom of the Mariana Trench sits the Challenger Deep, nearly 11,000 meters below the surface, the single deepest point in any ocean on the entire planet. The pressure down there is over 1,000 times what you experience at sea level, roughly equivalent to having around 50 jumbo jets stacked directly on top of you all at once, pressing down from every direction simultaneously. An unprotected human body wouldn't simply be crushed at that depth. It would happen so fast and so completely that there would functionally be nothing left to recover. No debris field, no wreckage, nothing for a search team to even look for. And yet, even there, in a place that should by every reasonable measure be sterile and lifeless, life exists anyway. The Mariana Hadal snailfish, the deepest living fish ever recorded on Earth, survives at this depth through specialized cellular structures that prevent its own proteins from collapsing under pressure that would instantly crush a steel submarine hull like an empty soda can. Tiny amphipods, shrimp-like scavengers barely an inch long, swarm across the trench floor in total permanent darkness, feeding on whatever scraps of organic material eventually drift all the way down from the world above, sometimes taking weeks just to arrive. Humans have physically visited the surface of the moon more times than we've visited the deepest point of our own planet. And the handful of times we actually have gone down there in reinforced submersibles built specifically to survive the pressure, we've found life waiting for us anyway, quietly surviving in a place that has no business supporting anything at all. So the next time you're floating in a pool, standing at the edge of the ocean, or even just looking out at the water from a beach, just remember that somewhere directly beneath you, in complete and total darkness, something has been surviving down there this entire time, in pressure that would instantly kill you, in cold that never warms, completely unaware that we exist on the surface at all, and in absolutely no hurry to find out. We've mapped more of Mars than we have of our own ocean floor, which means the genuinely strange part of this entire video isn't any single creature on the list. It's that we still don't actually know how many more of these are still down there, in the dark, completely undiscovered, waiting for someone with a submersible and a lot more patience than most of us have.